The train had rattled its final breath at Roma Termini station, leaving Alessia and her daughter Sophia stepping into the unforgiving Roman winter. Grey clouds pressed low above the ancient city, and a wet mist clung to the crumbling stones and narrow streets. Alessia tightened Sophia's scarf with trembling fingers, her own coat thin against the chill. A battered taxi took them winding through the outskirts of the city, past crumbling ruins and decaying villas, until finally, at the end of a long and twisted road, Villa Bellavista rose before them. It was just as Alessia remembered it. Grand, imposing, and utterly indifferent. Its once white walls were stained with time, ivy clawing up its sides like skeletal hands. The iron gates groaned on their hinges as Alessia pushed them open, the sound loud in the still air. She glanced down at Sophia, who clutched her worn toy rabbit against her chest. Alessia forced a smile she did not feel and led the way. Crunching up the gravel drive, every step heavier than the last, memories surged up unbidden. Childhood summers running through the gardens. Harsh words whispered behind closed doors. A father who never smiled at her. A mother whose touch was always cold. At the great oak doors, Alessia hesitated. The stone lions guarding the entrance seemed to sneer at her. Taking a breath, she knocked. The sound echoed through the cavernous halls within. The door opened, revealing Bibiana, impeccably dressed in black velvet, her painted lips curling into a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You made it," Bibiana said, as if the words tasted bitter. Behind her stood Carlo, arms folded, expression carved from stone. Alessia remembered him as a boy who pulled the wings off butterflies. He had not changed much, she thought. Without another word, they stepped aside, letting Alessia and Sophia pass into the warmth and noise of the villa. The scent of roasting meats, polished wood, and expensive perfume hit Alessia like a wave. The walls were lined with oil paintings of stern ancestors who seemed to watch them with silent judgment. Voices and laughter echoed from the grand salon, but no one came to greet them. Alessia tightened her grip on Sophia's hand, feeling the child's fear radiating from her small body. "You will stay in the study," Bibiana said curtly, leading them away from the bright, crowded rooms, down a shadowed corridor lined with cracked marble busts. The study was small, cold, and smelled faintly of mildew. Floor-to-ceiling shelves sagged with old books. A tattered rug covered the center of the stone floor. In one corner, a battered settee sagged sadly. "There is no bed, I'm afraid," Bibiana said with a mockery of sympathy. "But you will manage, I'm sure." She turned and left without another glance, her heels clicking sharply on the stone floor. Alessia set down their single suitcase and looked around. There was no fire in the hearth, and no comfort to be found here. She sank onto the settee, pulling Sophia into her lap. "Mama, why are they so cold?" Sophia whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Alessia kissed her daughter's tangled hair and held her close. "Because they have forgotten how to be kind," she said softly. "But we have not." Sophia rested her head against Alessia's chest. Outside, the snow began to fall, thin and silent, drifting against the cracked windows and blanketing Villa Bellavista in a shroud of white. In the distance, the bells of Rome began to toll, low and mournful, as if the very city wept for them. The first night at Villa Bellavista was a battleground between silence and memory. Every tick of the old grandfather clock in the hallway echoed like a hammer against Alessia's mind. Sophia had long since drifted into an uneasy sleep, curled under Alessia's thin coat on the sagging settee. The fire remained unlit. Alessia, unwilling to search the vast and unfamiliar villa for firewood, wrapped her arms around herself and listened to the house breathing. For that was how it seemed, the slow creaks and groans of ancient timber, the sudden soft thuds as if someone tiptoed just out of sight. She told herself it was just the cold and the age of the house. Yet as the hours dragged on, a strange unease gnawed at her resolve. There were murmurs in the darkness, indistinct and fleeting. Once, Alessia could have sworn she heard a child's giggle, high and chilling, from the corner of the room where shadows pooled the deepest. She closed her eyes tightly and willed herself not to listen. When dawn finally broke, gray and feeble, it brought no comfort. Bibiana reappeared, as perfectly composed as the night before, announcing stiffly that breakfast was served in the main dining hall. Dragging Sophia from sleep, Alessia brushed the girl's hair with her fingers and whispered reassurances she herself barely believed. They made their way through cold, echoing corridors, passing dust-covered portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow their every move. The dining hall was a cathedral of grandeur gone sour. A long table stretched the length of the room, draped in a threadbare cloth, set with fine silver that had not been polished for years. At one end sat Carlo, brooding over a cup of black coffee. Bibiana perched at the opposite end, her posture rigid. "Sit," Bibiana said without looking up. They ate in silence, broken only by the scrape of forks and the clink of porcelain. The food was plain and meager. Alessia forced herself to eat, aware of Sophia picking at her plate with small, listless fingers. After the meal, Bibiana announced brusquely that Alessia was to help sort through the belongings of Nonno Ernesto, the grandfather who had died and left Villa Bellavista in disarray. "You will start with the library," Bibiana said, handing her a heavy iron key. "There is much to do." The library was at the far end of the east wing, a part of the villa that even Alessia had avoided as a child. As she approached, the air grew noticeably colder. The key turned in the heavy door with a groaning sound, and the door swung open reluctantly. Inside, dust motes danced in the thin light from the tall, arched windows. Floor-to-ceiling shelves bowed under the weight of ancient books. In the center of the room stood a massive desk, covered in yellowed papers and crumbling leather tomes. Sophia clung to Alessia's hand. "Mama, it's cold in here," she whispered. Alessia squeezed her hand gently. "We will not be long." Yet as she began to sort through the piles, Alessia found herself drawn deeper into the library's embrace. Every drawer she opened, every book she touched, seemed to release the ghosts of the past. One drawer, stuck fast, finally yielded with a sharp tug. Inside lay a bundle of old letters, bound in faded ribbon. The paper was brittle, the ink faded. Alessia unfolded one carefully and began to read. The words spoke of secrets, of betrayals, of an inheritance tainted by lies. Names she recognized, Bibiana, Carlo, even her own mother, were scattered through the pages like stains. Her blood ran cold. A sudden sound, the snap of a book falling to the floor, made her start violently. Spinning around, she found the room empty. Only Sophia stood by the window, her tiny face pale against the glass. "Mama," Sophia said slowly, her voice oddly distant. "There's a man in the garden." Alessia rushed to her side, peering out through the fogged glass. But the gardens beyond were empty, save for the shifting mist and the skeletal trees. "There is no one," she said, though her voice shook. Sophia frowned, pressing a hand against the window. "But he was there," she insisted. "He was watching us." Alessia pulled her away gently. "It was just your imagination." Yet as they left the library, the heavy door creaking shut behind them, Alessia could not shake the feeling that Sophia had seen something very real. And somewhere, deep within the bones of Villa Bellavista, something had begun to stir. The discovery of the letters unsettled Alessia deeply. All morning, the words swirled in her mind like storm clouds, dark and heavy. She had tried to dismiss them as the ramblings of an old man, but the names, Bibiana, Carlo, and her late mother Francesca, were unmistakably clear. After lunch, Bibiana summoned Alessia to the sitting room, a place of faded luxury and dust-heavy curtains. The fire crackled half-heartedly in the hearth, throwing long jittery shadows on the worn carpet. "You ought to remain here until further notice," Bibiana said coldly, handing Alessia a thin envelope sealed with old wax. "This came for you." "For me?" Alessia asked, her voice cautious. "Apparently so." "From Ernesto." Bibiana turned sharply and left without another word. Alessia hesitated, staring at the envelope in her hands. The seal was broken, as if someone had already read its contents. Heart pounding, she unfolded the paper. The letter was brief but chilling. "To my beloved Alessia. If you are reading this, it means the villa is now yours. Beware those who live within these walls. Not all are what they seem. The answers you seek lie behind the locked door in the North Tower. But beware, child, once opened, it cannot be undone. Forgive me. Ernesto." The words bled into her soul, leaving an icy trail. Alessia folded the letter quickly and tucked it into her jacket. The North Tower. Memories flickered, half-formed and broken. Forbidden wings of the villa, doors that were always kept locked, warnings whispered late at night by her mother. "No one goes to the North Tower," Francesca used to say, pulling young Alessia away with fearful eyes. Now, as the evening drew in, and Villa Bellavista fell into a hush of gathering shadows, Alessia felt the weight of her grandfather's message pressing down on her. She needed to find that door. Sophia was dozing on the settee, cradling a worn doll Alessia had found tucked in a forgotten cupboard. Alessia kissed her forehead softly before slipping away into the labyrinthine halls. The air grew colder with each step towards the north wing. The villa seemed almost to breathe around her, its old bones groaning in the settling chill. Corridor after corridor passed in a blur of dust and cobwebs. Lamps flickered uncertainly as she walked past. Somewhere far away, she thought she heard the faint thud of heavy footsteps. She quickened her pace. Finally she reached it, a narrow door of blackened oak, bound in iron, with a heavy lock shaped like a snarling wolf. The key Bibiana had given her earlier. Could it fit? Hand trembling, Alessia inserted the iron key. It slid in smoothly, almost as if the door had been waiting for her all along. But just as she turned it, a voice behind her made her heart leap into her throat. "What are you doing?" Carlo stood at the end of the hall, his face shadowed, unreadable. For a moment, neither moved. Only the rising wind outside broke the silence, howling faintly through the broken windows. "I was just..." Alessia faltered. "You should not be here," Carlo said, his voice low and urgent. "The North Tower is dangerous." Dangerous. The word hung between them like a curse. "I need to know the truth," Alessia whispered, clutching the key still lodged in the lock. Carlo stepped closer, and for the first time, Alessia saw a flash of something. Fear? Desperation? In his eyes. "Some doors should never be opened," he said hoarsely. And then, without another word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, his footsteps swallowed by the house. Alessia stood frozen, the weight of choice heavy in her hand. Behind her, the door shuddered, ever so slightly, as if something on the other side had stirred at her touch. For a long moment, Alessia did not move. The corridor seemed to breathe around her, the walls expanding and contracting with the same anxious rhythm that thudded inside her chest. The cold handle in her hand felt alive, pulsing faintly as if connected to the dark heart of the villa itself. She turned the key fully. The lock groaned, resisting for a second, then gave way with a heavy click. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, spiral staircase plunging into darkness. A bitter scent of mildew and forgotten memories wafted up to greet her. Alessia hesitated, then lit a small lantern she had brought along. Its soft glow pushed back the shadows just enough to reveal the first few steps. Taking a deep breath, she began to descend. Each step downward seemed to erase her from the world above. The air grew thicker, heavier, almost liquid. She passed faded portraits with faces scratched away, old statues crumbling into piles of white dust, and doors that led to nowhere. As she reached the bottom, the staircase opened into a vast, circular chamber. At the center stood a large, cracked mirror, its frame entwined with iron vines. Surrounding it were ancient bookshelves, their contents spilling onto the floor like the innards of a wounded beast. And there, next to the mirror, was a single chair. Tied to it was a bundle of old clothes. No, Alessia realized with a jolt, a human form, long since reduced to brittle bones and scraps of fabric. A scream clawed at her throat but died before reaching her lips. Whoever this had been, they had been left here, forgotten, abandoned to the darkness. She stepped closer, driven by a force she could not name. Pinned to the chest of the skeleton was a medallion, tarnished and heavy. It depicted a wolf devouring a rose, the same symbol carved into the door. As she reached for it, the mirror began to hum, a low pulsing sound that vibrated through the stone floor. Alessia jerked back in alarm. In the reflection, the room twisted and shifted. She saw not herself, but another young woman, her mother Francesca, staring back at her with wide, terrified eyes. Francesca opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came. Instead, she lifted a trembling hand and pointed urgently at something behind Alessia. Alessia spun around. At first, she saw nothing. Just shadows. Then, movement. From the darkness beyond the chamber's edge, something slithered forward. Not quite human, not quite beast. A twisted, malformed figure, cloaked in black. It whispered her name. Alessia. She stumbled backwards, her lantern swinging wildly. The light flared, revealing glimpses, gnarled fingers, eyes like empty pits, mouths whispering in the folds of shadow. Desperate, Alessia ripped the medallion from the skeleton's chest. The chamber shook violently, dust pouring from the ceiling in thick clouds. The mirror shattered with a deafening crack, shards flying outward like knives. The creature shrieked, recoiling into the darkness. Clutching the medallion tightly, Alessia fled up the spiraling stairs, not daring to look back. The door to the north tower slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing through the empty halls. Alessia leaned against the wall, panting. The medallion in her hand burned against her skin, but she did not let go. Whatever secrets Ernesto had hidden, whatever darkness lurked in Villa Bellavista, it was only just beginning to reveal itself. And Alessia knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she and Sophia were now bound to this place in ways she could not yet understand. The next morning, Villa Bellavista felt different. The thick mists that usually clung to the gardens had thinned, revealing more of the crumbling statues and neglected fountains that decorated the grounds. Yet the air remained heavy, as if the villa itself was holding its breath. Alessia sat at the grand dining table, staring at the untouched breakfast before her. Her fingers traced the edges of the medallion, now cleaned and gleaming faintly under the light of the crystal chandelier. The image of the wolf and the rose seemed almost alive, a silent warning she could not ignore. Sophia entered the room, her small feet padding across the marble floor. "You didn't sleep," she said quietly, climbing onto a chair opposite Alessia. "No," Alessia replied, forcing a small smile. "Did you?" Sophia nodded, though the dark circles under her eyes betrayed her lie. Alessia tucked the medallion into her pocket, rising from her seat. "Come on. Let's go for a walk. We need some air." They crossed the overgrown courtyard and made their way towards the largest fountain, a once grand structure now overtaken by ivy and moss. The water inside was stagnant, reflecting the gray sky like a cracked mirror. Sophia ran ahead, her laughter echoing unnaturally across the empty grounds. Alessia watched her, the unease growing inside her. Then, from the corner of her eye, she spotted movement near the far end of the fountain. A man stood there, dressed in a long dark coat, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. He was perfectly still, as if he had been standing there for hours, unnoticed. Alessia's heart seized in her chest. She grabbed Sophia's hand and pulled her close. "Stay by me," she whispered. The man did not move, but something about his presence prickled at the edge of her senses, a silent alarm screaming in her mind. Gathering her courage, Alessia approached cautiously. "Can I help you?" she called out, her voice steady despite the fear knotting in her stomach. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You are Francesca's daughter," he said, his voice low and hoarse. Alessia stiffened. "Who are you?" The man chuckled, a dry, unsettling sound. "Names have power here, Signorina. You should be careful when asking for them." She took a step back, shielding Sophia behind her. "I have nothing to do with my mother's past," Alessia said firmly. "Leave us alone." The man's expression remained hidden beneath the shadow of his hat, but she sensed a smile. "Ah, but you do," he murmured. "You carry it around your neck." Her hand flew instinctively to the medallion in her pocket. The man tipped his hat, revealing pale, scarred skin and eyes like burning coals. "When the blood moon rises, the debt must be paid," he said. "Prepare yourself." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the twisted garden paths without another sound. Alessia stood frozen, the weight of his words pressing down on her. Sophia clutched her hand tightly. "Who was that, Mama?" she asked, her voice trembling. Alessia forced herself to smile, though her mind raced. "Just someone lost," she said. "Come. Let's go inside." But deep down, Alessia knew the truth. They were the ones who were lost. And the shadows were only just beginning to stir. Rain began to fall over Villa Bellavista by late afternoon. It was a slow, whispering rain that seemed to seep into the stone walls, making everything colder, darker. Alessia watched it through the tall windows, feeling an invisible hand press against her chest. Inside the villa, the lights flickered now and then, as if protesting the gathering storm. Sophia played quietly with her dolls on the thick carpet, humming an old lullaby Alessia did not recognize. The tune sent a shiver down her spine. In an effort to distract herself, Alessia decided to explore the house once more. She needed to know every corner, every secret. She needed to be prepared. Carrying a small torch she found in the kitchen, she moved carefully through the hallways, listening to the creaking floors and the whispers of the rain. She found herself back at the main staircase, the grand spiral that once must have been breathtaking. At the base of it, hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain, she noticed something she had missed before. A door. Low and narrow, almost blending into the wall. It had no handle, only a keyhole shaped like a rose. Alessia's heart began to race. She pulled the medallion from her pocket, the symbol of the rose and the wolf glinting in the dim light. Without fully understanding why, she brought the medallion closer to the keyhole. A faint click sounded. The door creaked open by itself, releasing a breath of cold, stale air from the darkness beyond. Alessia hesitated. Every instinct screamed for her to turn back. But another voice, quieter and older, urged her forward. She stepped inside. The passageway beyond was narrow and low-ceilinged, lined with crumbling stone. The smell of damp earth filled her nose. At the end of the short corridor, there was another door, this one wooden, with deep claw marks carved across its surface. Her torch flickered. Something moved behind the door. A slow, heavy scraping sound, like nails against stone. Alessia backed away, but before she could retreat fully, she saw it, an eye. Glinting, yellow, unblinking, staring at her through a crack in the wood. She stumbled back, heart pounding. The door rattled violently, as if whatever was behind it sensed her fear, tasted it. Alessia turned and ran, the torch bobbing wildly in her hand, the shadows chasing at her heels. She burst out into the main hall, slamming the velvet curtains shut behind her. Breathing heavily, she looked around. Sophia stood there, clutching her doll, her eyes wide and frightened. "Mama," she whispered. "There's someone upstairs." Alessia froze. Her mind raced. They were not alone. The house itself was waking up. And it was hungry for them. The sound of footsteps echoed from the second floor. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Alessia pulled Sophia close to her side, her heart thundering in her ears. She scanned the shadowed staircase but saw nothing. Still, the steps continued, growing louder, closer. She needed to hide. Her eyes darted around the grand hall, searching for a place they could disappear. Then she remembered, the library. Clutching Sophia's hand, Alessia raced across the hall, her footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs. She reached the double oak doors and slipped inside, pulling them shut behind her with a soft thud. The library smelled of old leather and dust. Towering bookshelves lined the walls, disappearing into the gloom above. A single chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, its light flickering like a dying star. Alessia moved quickly, guiding Sophia behind a row of heavy ancient books. They crouched low, hidden among the smell of paper and time. For a moment, there was silence. Then came the whispering. Soft, sibilant, rising from the books themselves, as if the words trapped on the pages were desperate to escape. Alessia pressed a hand over Sophia's mouth to keep her quiet. She strained her ears. The whispers were not random. They formed words. Names. Warnings. She could barely make them out, but one name came again and again, floating on the stale air. Vittoria. Vittoria. Alessia felt a chill crawl up her spine. Vittoria. The name written inside the locket. The woman from the portrait. The woman who looked exactly like her. Why were the books chanting her name? Suddenly, from somewhere deep within the library, a soft thud echoed, the sound of a heavy book falling from a high shelf. Sophia whimpered. Alessia squeezed her hand reassuringly but stayed frozen, listening. More books began to fall. One after another, louder and louder, until it sounded like a storm of paper and wood crashing around them. The chandelier above them flickered wildly. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the chaos stopped. Silence, thick and unnatural, settled over the room. Alessia rose slightly, peering over the row of books. In the center of the library, lying open on the floor, was an enormous leather-bound book. Its pages glowed faintly. Against every instinct screaming inside her, Alessia stood up. She stepped cautiously towards the book, Sophia clinging to her side. As she drew closer, she saw that the pages were filled with intricate drawings, symbols she had seen before, in the medallion, in the carvings on the walls. A map. A map of Villa Bella Vista. But it was different. Beneath the villa, hidden beneath layers of earth and stone, was a labyrinth. And at the heart of it, a chamber marked only with a single word. Sacrificio. Sacrifice. The room seemed to spin around Alessia. The whispers rose again, furious now, desperate. The chandelier shook violently above them. Sophia screamed. Without thinking, Alessia grabbed the book, tucked it under her arm, and ran for the doors. The library seemed to fight her, the shelves groaning and shifting as if trying to trap her inside. But with a final desperate pull, she wrenched the doors open and stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. Behind her, the doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. She clutched Sophia close. They were no longer just guests here. They were part of something ancient, something that demanded a price. And time was running out. Alessia stumbled through the dim corridor, the heavy book pressed tightly against her chest. Sophia clung to her waist, her small legs struggling to keep pace. The villa seemed different now. The walls, once grand and silent, now seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with every step they took. The portraits lining the walls watched them with glassy, accusing eyes. A low humming sound vibrated through the air, almost too faint to hear but strong enough to raise goosebumps on Alessia's skin. She needed to find the passage shown in the book. The labyrinth. The chamber. And she had to find it before something else found them. The map in her mind's eye pointed towards the east wing, a part of Villa Bella Vista they had not yet explored. That was where the entrance to the labyrinth lay hidden. Taking a deep breath, Alessia turned left at the next hallway, the air growing colder with every step. Dust swirled around them, stirred by an invisible hand. At the end of the corridor stood a large arched doorway, framed by two statues of angels. Or so they seemed at first. As Alessia drew closer, she realized the angels were not smiling. Their faces were twisted in sorrow. Their stone eyes were weeping blood. Sophia whimpered, hiding her face against Alessia's side. With trembling fingers, Alessia pushed the door open. Beyond lay a vast abandoned ballroom. Moonlight streamed through shattered windows, illuminating the faded gold of the ornate ceiling. Broken chandeliers dangled precariously. The scent of decay was overwhelming. And there, across the room, hidden behind a heavy red velvet curtain, was a staircase descending into darkness. The entrance. Alessia's heart pounded. She hesitated only a moment before crossing the ballroom, her footsteps echoing on the cracked marble floor. The floorboards beneath her groaned ominously. She quickened her pace. Halfway across, a sudden gust of wind howled through the broken windows, slamming the door shut behind them with a thunderous bang. The chandeliers above swayed dangerously. A low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows. Sophia screamed. Without thinking, Alessia scooped her up and ran. She reached the staircase and tore back the curtain, revealing rough-hewn stone steps spiraling into the blackness below. No hesitation now. Alessia plunged downward, the air growing colder and damper with every step. Behind them, the growl grew louder, followed by the sharp crack of something heavy landing on the ballroom floor. They were being hunted. Deeper and deeper they descended, the only light coming from the faint glow of the ancient book clutched to Alessia's side. The stone walls around them were slick with moisture, etched with more of the strange symbols. Symbols of protection. Warnings. And something else. Alessia's breath caught in her throat. There, carved deep into the archway at the bottom of the stairs, were the words she had seen in the book. Sacrificio. Her fingers trembled as she traced the letters. A choice awaited her beyond this point. A choice between salvation and damnation. But there was no turning back. With Sophia in her arms and fear biting at her heels, Alessia stepped through the archway and into the labyrinth. Into the heart of the villa's darkest secret. The air grew heavier as Alessia descended deeper into the labyrinth, each step a struggle against the invisible weight pressing down on her chest. The light from the book dimmed, casting only a faint halo around them. Walls of ancient stone twisted and turned, forming narrow passages that seemed to shift behind them, as if the labyrinth itself were alive and aware of their presence. Sophia whimpered softly in Alessia's arms, but Alessia dared not speak, dared not even breathe too loudly. This was a place of solemnity, a place of sacrifice. Every step echoed in the stillness, swallowed quickly by the oppressive silence. The symbols on the walls grew more elaborate, intertwining figures of angels and demons, each locked in eternal battle. Some depicted humans kneeling before monstrous figures, offering tokens, tears, and blood. It was not a maze built merely to confuse. It was a sanctuary of forgotten rituals. As Alessia moved cautiously forward, she noticed a low chanting sound. It was distant, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Voices. In Latin. chanting a liturgy so old it prickled Alessia's skin with ancient fear. She followed the sound, heart pounding, down a narrower tunnel lined with crumbling statues. The faces of the statues had been worn smooth by centuries, but their body language, their gestures of agony and despair, remained hauntingly clear. At the end of the tunnel, she found a small stone altar, cracked and blackened by time. Upon it lay a single item, an ancient, iron key. Rust flecked its surface, but it still gleamed faintly in the dim light. Without hesitation, Alessia reached out and took the key. The instant her fingers closed around it, the chanting grew louder. The ground beneath her rumbled. Dust fell from the ceiling. Sophia clutched her tighter, whimpering in terror. Alessia turned, her instincts screaming at her to run. She sprinted back into the labyrinth, the walls seeming to close in around them. Corridors she had passed through moments ago now looked different, twisted and rearranged. The labyrinth was shifting. It did not want them to leave. Shadows moved at the edges of the light. Whispers chased after them, curling through the darkness. They reached a fork in the path. One side led to a dark tunnel that smelled of damp earth and decay, the other towards a faint, flickering light. Alessia chose the light. Always the light. She pushed forward, gasping for breath, until they emerged into a small chamber. It was circular, with an ornate mosaic on the floor. At the center of the mosaic was a symbol she recognized from the book, the sigil of sacrifice. In the far wall stood a heavy iron door, ancient and impenetrable. At its center, a keyhole. The key she had taken. Alessia approached carefully, every fiber of her being on edge. As she raised the key, a deep voice boomed from the darkness behind her. "You should not have come." Alessia froze. She turned slowly. A figure stepped from the shadows, cloaked in black, face hidden by a hood. It radiated an aura of such palpable menace that Alessia staggered back instinctively. "You have disturbed the pact," the voice said, low and thunderous. "The price must be paid." Alessia tightened her grip on Sophia. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I won't give her up." The figure laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. "You misunderstand," it said. "The sacrifice must be you." Before Alessia could react, the floor beneath her feet began to crack and splinter. The mosaic of sacrifice was awakening. Sophia screamed. The iron door began to glow with an eerie red light. Time was running out. With a cry of defiance, Alessia thrust the key into the lock. The chamber shuddered violently. The hooded figure raised its hands, chanting in the same ancient Latin, louder, faster. The walls began to collapse. And Alessia turned the key. The iron door swung open with a deafening screech, revealing a narrow stairway leading upward. A way out. Without a moment's hesitation, Alessia bolted through the doorway, clutching Sophia close. Behind them, the chamber crumbled, the hooded figure's roar of fury echoing through the collapsing labyrinth. Up and up they ran, the stairway spiraling towards a faint glimmer of daylight. Freedom was close. But the labyrinth had not yet released them. The walls themselves began to warp and twist, reaching out like skeletal fingers. Alessia dodged, stumbled, and pushed forward, every step a desperate fight against the collapsing world behind them. She would not let the villa claim them. Not now. Not ever. With one final burst of strength, Alessia burst through the last door and into the blinding light of the outside world. They were free. For now. But as she looked back at the crumbling entrance, she knew the villa was not truly defeated. It was merely waiting. Waiting for the next soul foolish enough to seek its secrets. The sun shone brightly over Rome, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets as Alessia stumbled away from the villa's crumbling ruins. The city seemed unchanged, oblivious to the horrors that festered beneath its ancient skin. Cars passed. Tourists laughed. Life carried on. As if nothing had happened. As if no one had screamed in the dark. Alessia, disheveled and bloodied, cradled Sophia tightly as she made her way down via Appia Antica, the historic road leading back towards the heart of the city. Every step felt heavier. The book, once vibrant with a life of its own, now hung limply from her satchel, its pages darkened and brittle. It had served its purpose. Or perhaps, Alessia thought grimly, it had merely completed the first part of a much larger game. They reached a small, secluded cafe. Alessia collapsed into a chair, trembling. The waiter approached cautiously, offering water and a concerned look, but Alessia could only shake her head. Her mind was elsewhere. Across the street, hidden in the shadows of a crumbling aqueduct, she saw it. The villa. Whole again. Standing tall, as if it had never been touched. Its windows dark. Its gates open. Waiting. A cold shiver ran down her spine. It was impossible. The villa had fallen into ruins. She had seen it. She had barely escaped it. Yet there it stood, pristine and silent, as if mocking her. And she realized the truth. You cannot destroy what was never meant to die. The Villa Sant'Andrea was not a place. It was an idea. A hunger. A trap woven into the very fabric of Rome's ancient blood. It would rebuild itself. It would wait. And when the time was right, it would call again. Alessia pressed Sophia closer. She had survived. But the mark of the villa lingered. A faint symbol, burned onto her wrist, hidden beneath her sleeve. The sigil of sacrifice. She did not know what it meant yet. Only that it bound her to the villa in ways she could not yet understand. The sun dipped lower, casting the streets in deep gold and blood-red hues. And in that fading light, Alessia made a silent vow. She would find a way to break the curse. She would uncover the true origin of the villa. She would end this. Not just for herself, but for every soul the villa had ever touched. Alessia stood, clutching Sophia's small hand in hers. She turned away from the shadowed street, from the memory of what she had faced, and walked back into the heart of Rome. Unseen by her, high above in the broken arches of the aqueduct, a figure in black watched. The same figure from the labyrinth. Its hood obscured its face, but its eyes, ancient, unblinking, followed her every move. The villa was not done with Alessia. Not yet. It never truly was. And in the ancient city, where every stone whispered the secrets of the dead, the curse of Villa Sant'Andrea pulsed quietly. Waiting. Breathing. Hungering.